Coming up, the backlog of court cases is on the decline.
More than a dozen operators up for those 8 licenses that will be granted for gaming. I'm Clint Watson. We'll tell you all about it ahead in the Bahamas Tonight.
Also tonight, we look at how something as simple as catching the bus is anything but for some Bahamians.
And our boys' national team gets ready to post up against the world. The Bahamas Tonight, the National Report, starts now.
Now in HD. ZNS Network presents The Bahamas Tonight. This portion of the news brought to you by BTC Every Day.
Gaming legislation could be in the House of Assembly by next week. Good evening and welcome to the Bahamas Tonight. I'm Andrew Knowles.
I'm Kish Latterly. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. Well, the Cabinet Office is reviewing the much anticipated gaming legislation to give the final approval before the document is tabled in the House of Assembly in just over a week's time. This after the Ministry of Legal Affairs and the Attorney General's office spent a considerable amount of time shaping the historic piece of legislation to govern what is anticipated and already proven to be a rapidly growing and lucrative gaming industry. Tonight, Clint Watson tells us about the parameters of the legislation and how the process of regularization will impact hundreds of web shops spread throughout the country.
There are roughly 14 companies operating hundreds of web shops throughout the Bahamas, but very soon, only 8 of those companies will be granted licenses to provide gaming. The others, by law, will be required to cease their operations, although Gaming Minister the Honorable Obi Wuscombe doesn't foresee that happening.
Companies have suggested that they intend to seek collaboration and joining forces and working together, so I think there'll be mechanisms to work it out.
The application process has not been confirmed at this point, but Minister Wuscombe anticipates it will be a straightforward and transparent mechanism. As for the web shop operators, well, it won't be complete forgiveness without consequences. The minister confirmed that all companies will face a one-time penalty fee, the amount not yet determined.
Well, they've been operating illegally. And the truth is without regulations, and they have in fact not been conforming with laws of the state. And although we are going to seek to regularize now, there is a penalty to be paid, and the state has to be paid for or rewarded for passing the legislation now, causing for the regularization, and also by best international standards, you have to impose a penalty, and so the penalty has to be levied on all.
The industry employs thousands of workers, many of whom have been with web shops for several years and have accrued tenure. Once regularized, the concern among them is whether they will lose their tenure and must begin from day one of the legal operation.
That's a consideration we have to take into account, because the truth is if they've been paying national insurance, then, and I'm sure that they have been in many cases, then you have to look at their employment date from the time they're paying national insurance.
Minister of State for Legal Affairs Damian Gomez says the Attorney General's office has been working hard on the legislation for casino and web shop gaming, particularly in light of the pending debate in Parliament. Covering all of the concerns will be crucial. He explained that taxation will not come cheap for those operating, a key factor in why only 8 licenses will be granted.
They're fairly high fees and relatively onerous taxes, which are borne by the gaming industry, together with fairly onerous public obligations for donations.
Now, it's important to understand that this legislation makes provision for various types of gaming and casino licenses. Once it's passed, operators will have to apply for whatever kind of license they want to have in order to operate. Clint Watson, ZNS Network News.
From the legal sector tonight, the Attorney General's office tackling more cases, clearing the backlog and convicting persons on a timely basis. The Minister of State for Legal Affairs discussed the issue with our Janae Noel Ferguson outside of Cabinet today, revealing that the country's conviction rate is up.
Persons are being hauled before the courts, raising the AG's office conviction rate to 60%. Minister of State for Legal Affairs Damian Gomez revealed this is a 30% increase from 2012.
Between December and June of this year, completed 84 trials. You will recall that in the same period, for the whole of the preceding fiscal year, that's 2012-2013, we had only completed 112 to 115 trials.
The marked improvements, he says, can not only be accredited to the addition of new courts.
We are pushing to make the courts far more efficient. We're listening to the judges, responding to their criticisms of our preparation and addressing those issues. We have done a remarkably good job in the last 2 years.
Gomez attributes the success of the conviction rate to more preparedness in terms of case files. He says when they first came into office, a lot of the files had to be sent back, but that's something that his office, he says, is working on.
Files were not properly attended to in the office. And by that, I mean police would send the file down and an officer would willy-nilly pick it up and go to trial. What we've insisted on is that before any arraignment, that we actually have to go through the file and identify whether the file is trial ready. If it is not trial ready because of the absence of evidence, we have to insist that those evidential matters are satisfied and put in the file before we sign off on arraignment.
Gomez says this ensures the accused is treated fairly and that the prosecution presents the best case possible for the benefit of the public. Plans, he says, are underway to increase the conviction rate as high as 90%, on par with international standards. Janae Noel Ferguson, ZNS Network News.
Major changes are on the way for Her Majesty's prisons, with the corrections bill set to be enacted by the end of this summer.
Prison Superintendent Patrick Wright says preparations are already being made internally for the change, with a number of officers being trained in Canada.
Now, recommendations, he says, will now be made to the government to take the prison from punitive to correctional. A major aspect of that is changing the infrastructure.
We're talking about proper housing. You know, it is no mystery that prison is overcrowded. In order to perform corrections, prisons have to be properly separated by crime, gangs, and all of those things. And so infrastructure is one of the key things we are working on in order to properly do corrections. The other is education. Education was always a part of the prison, but now that can go to another level.
Now, Ramming adds that there are plans for a drug rehabilitation program to be implemented as well.
90% of our crime that's committed in the Bahamas is drug related. And so many of prisons have some drug dependency, and there's an urgent need for a drug treatment facility. And I can say that the Ministry of National Security, through its agency, HM Prisons, along with Sandlands, we have formed a partnership where we are working on that facilities and its management that is ongoing.
The Bahamas will celebrate its 41st independence on a much smaller scale than last year, with Minister of Tourism, the Honorable Obi Wolshcombe, estimating festivities will cost just under $1 million. Organizers are using activities as a clarion call for peace, celebrating under the theme, Celebrating Our Culture, a Commitment for Peace. Activities will kick off with the National Pride Day celebration on July 4th, with other highlights including the police beat retreat on July 6th, the swearing in of a new Governor General on July 8th, and the 41st anniversary celebration on Clifford Park on July 9th. While the budget is smaller, Wolshcombe says Bahamians can still expect a stellar show.
It's going to be different, but in a way that it's a production that will see art in all its forms for the first time at Clifford Park, and I think it's going to be magnificent. Scale back is not only because it's not your 40th, it's not the 40th, but it is the 41st. But the shows and the excitement will be equally as good, even more.
Organizers will also be attempting to break the Guinness Book of World Records record for the most persons blowing a conch shell at the same time, which now sits at 258. Director of the Independence Celebration Activities, Ian Poitier, says the show will be different, noting that the focus will be on the birth of the nation and the formulation of the Bahamian identity. Commenting on the smaller budget, he says having less resources forces organizers to be more creative.
Please, whatever activities there are, find a moment where you can participate, find a time when you can show up, and hopefully with all the pride and joy and celebration, we also find those quiet moments to renew our commitment to peace. In a way, having smaller budgets means you have to be more imaginative and more creative, and that's what we've attempted to do. So the fact that we don't have as much to spend doesn't mean that we have to produce a show of lesser quality.
Nearly 100 former City Market employees attended an emergency meeting at the R.M. Bailey Park.
The weekend meeting was called to discuss just how those former employees plan to go about securing millions they say is owed to them by the now defunct food store chain.
I got instructions from the employees exactly their wishes, their demands, and their requests. As their representative, I cannot act without their them telling me what exactly they want me to do. They made it emphatically clear that all persons representing them must now be aware that they are accepting nothing but all of the monies owed to them. It's non-negotiable. What they are indicating to me is that, one, they want all of the severance owed to them, plus the 2 years interest attached to their severance.
Now, a meeting between managers and representatives of the City Market food store chain was expected to take place on Monday, but that meeting was postponed. Well, still ahead tonight is ZNS News investigation into the plight of the disabled on the bus.
And our boys national team heads into competition. You're watching The Bahamas Tonight.
This segment of the news is brought to you by Shell Quality Fuels.